Good morning. Usually on Saturdays, I've been doing a devotional. This week is going to be a little different because looking at the Sunday school material, I found that they wanted to, the quarterly writers wanted us to squeeze two chapters into one, and I just couldn't manage that. So today, in place of the normal devotional, we're going to do part one of the Sunday school study in Revelation. So we'll be going to Revelation, that is chapter 8 this morning. One of the difficulties with studying Revelation is the incredible amount of imagery that is used in the book. And we need to be careful not to become hyper-literal in our understanding of this book. That is, we can't take everything at face value. It's the nature of Revelation as a piece of literature to use symbolism extensively. So if we're going to treat it literally, that means in this case, we have to allow for that fact and try to understand what the symbols were meant to imply. And of course, we also need to recognize that some things are to be taken at face value. Now, if this were an easy study, then everyone would come to identical conclusions on every verse. It's not an easy study, but it is definitely worth the time and effort. So today we're going to start off in chapter 8. The first verse therein says, "And when he had opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour." Now, the six seals that had been opened prior to this, each revealed something that was going to happen upon the earth. The opening of the seventh seal reveals a period of silence in heaven, and this calls to mind the teaching of the opening chapters of Genesis, which tell us that the earth was created in 6 days and the Lord rested on the seventh day. So we have the six seals, the seventh open, and we have a period of pause or rest. And after this pause, the revelation of things to come continues. So looking at verses 2 through 4, John writes, "And I saw the seventh angel which stood before God, the seven angels which stood before God, and to them were given seven trumpets. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer, and there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar, which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense, which came with the prayers of the saints, ascended up before God out of the angel's hand." Now, the fact that the angel stands before the altar calls to mind the Old Testament sacrificial system. The angel is seen to be a servant of the Lord. And the offering that comes before God at this point is not an animal sacrifice, but is the prayers of all the saints. Now, it's important to note that the word saints does not refer to a limited list of people to whom any organization on earth has granted such a title. The word saints is from the Greek word that means holy. Thus, a saint is a holy one, and for something to be holy is for that something to be set apart unto God. So simply put, a saint is a true believer in Jesus Christ who, through his or her faith in the Savior, is set apart unto God. So here the prayers of the saints are seen as an act of worship and sacrifice. Verses 5 and 6, "And the angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar and cast it into the earth. And there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. And the seven angels which had the seven trumpets prepared themselves to sound." I've read commentaries that try to figure out what the voices were saying. But the fact here is that the Greek word for voice is the same exact word used in that language for sound. So when it says voices, we can't understand that simply as sounds. Notice that as soon as our attention is drawn back to the earth, we are once again looking at an earthquake. We had read in Revelation 6:12, I beheld when he had opened the sixth seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood. In chapter 8, as we return to the scene of the earthquake, the angels have not yet sounded their trumpets. Because of this, I am of the opinion that the earthquake is not something new, but rather we're just coming back to the same earthquake that we left behind in chapter 6. That's my thought on it. But only after the earthquakes do the trumpets begin. And in verse 7 we read, the first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth, and a third part of the trees was burned up, and all green grass was burned up. So after the earthquake, the first trumpet announces hail and fire mingled with blood. In the occurrence of a catastrophic earthquake, you most surely can expect some degree of volcanic activity. The greater the earthquake, the more it's going to probably trigger volcanic activity. With a major volcanic eruption, moisture is gathered in the plume of smoke that is catapulted into the atmosphere as steam. As it rises, that cools, it becomes a liquid, and when it rises high enough, of course, it becomes ice. And then, because of its weight, it rains back down upon the earth. So an intense earthquake will likely be accompanied by intense volcanic eruption, and that may well create the hail. Well, then there's another question. What about the blood? It says hail and fire mingled with blood. Is this to be taken literally? Well, some do take it literally. Others do not. As for what it might symbolize, there are some intriguing thoughts. First, there's the possibility that John is saying that what he sees looks like blood. In Genesis 49, wine is called the blood of grapes. Of course, it's not literal blood. Verse 11 there says, binding his foal into the vine, and his ass's colt to the choice vine. He washed his garments in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes. So wine may certainly look like blood, but if you call it the blood of grapes, you're not saying that it's actually blood. You're just saying it resembles blood. In the New Testament, the term blood is sometimes used to imply guilt, and with it, the real or potential punishment. When Paul tried to convince certain Jews of the gospel, they rejected it, and we read in Acts 18, verse 6, and when they opposed themselves and blasphemed, he shook his raiment and said unto them, your blood be upon your own heads. I am clean. From henceforth I will go unto the Gentiles. When the people called for the crucifixion of Jesus, they were willing to take the responsibility for his death and, of course, any punishment that might go with that. And surely they didn't really expect any punishment. But we read in Matthew 27:25, then answered all the people and said, his blood be on us and on our children. So if blood can be indicative of judgment, and if what we are seeing in Revelation is part of the wrath of God, it certainly makes sense to understand that the hail and fire mingled with blood speaks both of the literal and figuratively of the judgment of God. So let's go on verses 8 and 9. It says, and the second angel sounded, and as it were a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and a third part of the sea became blood, and the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and a third part of the ships were destroyed. This may also be connected with the earthquakes and volcanic activity that would be connected to them. If so, then we're talking about unprecedented seismic and volcanic activity. Some believe that what is mentioned here is a large meteorite. Whatever exactly it is, its effects are cataclysmic. It's said to kill 1/3 of all sea life and destroy 1/3 of all the ships at sea. It is also said that 1/3 part of the sea becomes blood. Verses 10 and 11, we read, "And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp. And it fell upon 1/3 part of the rivers and upon the fountains of water. And the name of the star is called Wormwood. And the 1/3 part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter." Here, without a doubt, is a large meteorite. It's interesting that this one object is said to fall on 1/3 of the rivers and fountains of water. Well, if a large meteor were to strike the earth, it would first be likely to shatter into many parts when it made contact with the Earth's atmosphere. And that would explain how this one thing could affect so many different bodies of water. Rivers and fountains of water, a term that was sometimes used to speak of the source of a river. These things have to do with fresh water. The single most important thing when it comes to sustaining physical life is water. And that's what's being affected here, is the fresh water. The word wormwood is from a Greek word, absinthos, which was the name of a very bitter herb. And although the herb had some medicinal uses, its extreme bitterness led to using its name to speak of poison. So what we have here is a poisoning of 1/3 of all fresh water sources. Verse 12 says, "And the fourth angel sounded, and the 1/3 part of the sun was smitten, and the 1/3 part of the moon, and the 1/3 part of the stars, so as the 1/3 part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for 1/3 part of it, and the night likewise." It's quite possible to understand this as speaking of the atmospheric pollution that would be caused by extreme volcanic activity, which would result from extreme seismic activity. It reduces the light from the sun and moon and stars by 1/3. So imagine, if you can, this chaotic situation. Imagine what it would be like to be in the middle of that. Extreme earthquakes everywhere. Destruction of 1/3 of all the ships at sea. 1/3 of all the sea life dead. When 1/3 of all the ships at the sea would be catastrophic, not only in the number of lives lost on those ships, but also for international trade. Having 1/3 of the sea life dead certainly wouldn't be good for the fishing industry. Having 1/3 of fresh water sources poisoned, and that's not going to be good for farming or sustaining life at all. And we're told that people die from drinking the water. So, in this scenario, people would be probably willing to fight over a glass of clean water. But after all of this is presented, we read in verse 13 of chapter 8, "And I beheld and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants or the inhabitants of the earth, by reason of the other voices of the trumpets of the 3 angels which are yet to sound." Now, as if what hasn't happened already, as if what's happened already, rather, isn't bad enough, it's catastrophic. It's certainly a frightening scene. But only after this is woe announced. What comes next is going to be worse. So this is part one. I'm going to put up another video. That will be part two as we dig into the next chapter. Thanks for tuning in for this. God bless you. Have a great day.